I never thought I'd say this, but this episode needs less Q. This is a review of the Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode Q-less. If you have not seen this episode and you don't want to know what happens in it, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. So here we are, early in Deep Space Nine's run. First half of the first season, the show is still finding its footing, developing its creative voice, a spin-off of a popular show trying to expand the universe, establish itself as different, unique, distinct from its parent series, and what better way to do that than to bring on one of that parent series' most popular recurring characters for no reason whatsoever. As the episode begins, Dr. Bashir's seemingly successful attempt to seduce a woman by telling her the thrilling tale of the time he aced the written portion of his finals at medical school is interrupted by an urgent summons from Commander Sisko, who needs Bashir and Chief O'Brien at one of the landing pads right away. A runabout has just returned from an excursion through the wormhole, and something is very wrong. The ship barely made it back to the station, and now it's been so depleted of power that the door won't even open. Oxygen levels are dangerously low, and Dax, and Ensign, and a mysterious third person are trapped inside. O'Brien plugs a battery backup into the door, and Sisko and Kira manage to force it open. Everyone inside is okay, including the mystery passenger, whom O'Brien recognizes as Vash, Captain Picard's hookup, who went off on an adventure through time and space with Q the last time we saw her on TNG. And as everyone exits the runabout, we see, well, look who it is! Q! Oh boy, a Q episode! I bet this is gonna be so much fun! A Q episode! Vash sure seems to have attracted a lot of attention, and in Dr. Bashir's case, I do mean attracted. Not that I blame him, but then again, this is Season 1 Bashir, who is up for it with pretty much anybody. Sisko's interest in Vash is more professional. He wonders how she, a human, wound up in the Gamma Quadrant, where she says she's been for the last 2 years, when the only way to get to the Gamma Quadrant is through the wormhole, which they just discovered a few months ago, or to just, fly there, which would take decades at top speed. So either way, the I've been there for 2 years thing doesn't work. Vash doesn't want to talk about it. She says it's personal. Speaking of Vash in the Gamma Quadrant, she collected quite a few artifacts during her travels there, valuable artifacts, and she wants to make sure nothing happens to them while she's on the station, so she opens up a safe deposit box, and the guy who works at the safe deposit box place inventories every single item that Vash is putting in the safe deposit box, and we get to watch the entire thing in real time. A Q episode! Sisko catches Vash on her way out of the post office and talks her into returning to Earth, since there's a bunch of scientists there who would love to hear all about her adventures in the Gamma Quadrant. Later, Sisko gets an update from O'Brien about the runabout. There's nothing wrong with it, except for the fact that it was completely drained of power. Then, as they're talking, the power goes out momentarily on the station. They head up to Ops, where Dax notices a technical detail which suggests that the power drain they just experienced is being caused by the same thing that drained the power on the runabout. Meanwhile, Vash is unpacking in her quarters when Q shows up. Apparently, Q and Vash had a falling out, which led to Q dropping her off in the Gamma Quadrant, which is how she wound up there. But now Q is back to give her a second chance. They can team up again and resume their tour of the universe. Vash is like, nah. But Q refuses to take no for an answer. He tells her she was nothing without him, that if she tries to leave him, she'll regret it, that if she comes back, everything will be great, the standard abusive partner shtick. But Vash stands firm and keeps telling him to get lost. Quark shows up with some wine because he heard about the valuable artifacts Vash stashed in her safe deposit box, and he proposes that she auction the artifacts at his bar and they split the profits. At first, Quark wants a 50-50 split, but Vash gives him the Ferengi equivalent of a double-fisted handjob, and he agrees to terms more favorable to Vash. Then Quark leaves, and Q comes back. This is all still the same scene, by the way. And Q's like, ew, Ferengis are gross, and you just jerked off his ears. You just jerked off his gross Ferengi ears. And the doorbell rings, and it's Dr. Bashir, because the scene is still not over yet. Bashir invites Vash out for dinner. She says yes. They agree to meet in about 20 minutes. Bashir leaves. Q comes back because we're still in this scene. Q reiterates that Vash will regret leaving him. Vash is like, I'll take my chances. Q says something vaguely threatening and leaves, and that, finally, is the end of the scene. Whew! Q disguises himself as a waiter to thwart Bashir's date with Vash. He puts a whammy on Bashir to make him sleepy, and Bashir wanders off to take a nap. O'Brien happens to catch a glimpse of Q and goes back to Ops to tell Cisco about it, which leads to a bit of exposition about who Q is and how he and Vash know each other. There's another power drain, and O'Brien suggests that maybe it's Q playing a prank on them, like that time he transported the Enterprise crew into a recreation of Sherwood Forest. Yep, sounds good. Creating an elaborate history and folklore-derived fantasy, dimming the lights. Definitely the same MO. That's some good sleuthing, O'Brien. Cisco goes to Quark's to talk to Vash about Q, but then Q himself shows up. And then Q and Cisco have an old-fashioned bare-knuckle boxing match. And Cisco punches Q in the face. And Q's like, you hit me, but Picard never hit me. And Cisco's like, I'm not Picard. And that's the only part of the episode anybody remembers. People start arriving for Quark and Vash's auction. A big alien dude, a Ferengi guy, a synth pop trio. Odo doesn't like that. He calls Quark into his office to just have a chat, I guess. To let Quark know that he's aware of the auction and is watching, so Quark had better not try anything funny. The purpose of their conversation isn't clear. But Odo's like, you humanoids and your obsession with material wealth. You buy all this stuff, then you die, and your kids sell it off to other people who buy it, and then their kids sell it off when they die, and it just goes on like that until the big rip finally puts everyone out of their misery. Quark's like, but you must be a little materialistic, right? Wouldn't you like a nice fancy bucket to sleep in when you revert to goo mode? And Odo's like, no. And that's the end of that scene, which exists as a part of this episode. Vash is on her way to Quark's for the auction. Q intercepts her and attempts to persuade her to take him back by torturing her with debilitating illnesses and implying if she doesn't take him back, he'll just leave her like that. The auction starts. Vash almost loses the room by getting too lost in the weeds trying to explain the historical and cultural significance of the first artifact, so Quark takes over with his pushy huckster routine, and the bidders like that a lot more and start shelling out. Meanwhile, at Ops, the crew is still trying to figure out why the station is losing power. By this time, they also have another problem. Some mysterious force is dragging the station toward the wormhole. If they can't figure out what it is and stop it, the station will enter the wormhole and be torn apart. Q pops in to make fun of the crew a little. After a reminder, he does recognize O'Brien from the Enterprise, coldly labeling him, quote, one of the little people, which is the other thing people remember about this episode if they remember something else besides Cisco punching Q. Anyway, the auction goes on. Q pops in to sow a bit of chaos by telling the bidders that they're all going to die in a few minutes when the station enters the wormhole. Vash, like everyone else, blames the whole scenario on Q, but Q swears he has nothing to do with it. Dax tries a couple of technobabble things, and eventually they are able to trace the source of the power drains and the attractive force pulling them toward the wormhole, and wouldn't you know it, the source is the mysterious glittering gem Vash brought back from the Gamma Quadrant. The mysterious glittering gem they're auctioning off right now. Dax scans it with her tricorder and is like, this thing's gonna blow, so Cisco sticks his communicator in the box, and O'Brien locks on with the transporter and beams the box into space just in time for it to glow up and transform into a beautiful space butterfly that sails into the wormhole. How about that? The solution to the mystery was that all the problems were inadvertently caused by a new kind of life form that just wanted to go home, just like all the other times that happened. Q finally accepts that Vash is breaking up with him and leaves. Vash decides not to go back to Earth after all, but to go plunder some ruins on another planet so she can fence them through Quark, and Bashir shows up to ask Dax what he's missed because he's been asleep this whole time. Well, at least somebody was having fun. A Q episode! Where to even start with this one? This is a bad episode. Like most below-average Deep Space Nine episodes, it's not unwatchably bad, it's not painful to sit through or anything. It has its moments, but the central dilemma feels straight off the rack, is predictable and derivative with no added spin or imagination to set it apart from previous Star Trek episodes where the big twist was that the mysterious object was actually just a life form trying to get home. In addition to the rehashed plot, this episode feels excessively padded. There's the scene with Vash in the assay office where we get to watch her open a safe deposit box in painstaking detail. The scene establishes nothing important that isn't established in later scenes or couldn't have been established in a much shorter scene. It's just filling time. Ditto for the scene with Odo and Quark in the security office. Quark and Odo are a great pairing, and Armin Shimmerman and Renea Bergenois do their best to pull something out of it, but the scene is pointless, accomplishes nothing, and again, seems to exist purely to fill time. You might expect filler scenes like these in two-parters, where sometimes the writers have to stretch a bit to fill the running time, but in a standard 1-hour episode, not expected and not a good sign. The episode has two more big problems, and those problems center on the two guest characters, so let's take them one at a time and start with Vash. For me, Q-less misses the point of Vash. I know not everyone finds her an appealing character, but to the extent that she is appealing, even if only in theory, surely her appeal lies in her disreputable qualities. She's a rogue, a thief, a trespasser. That's what made her an intriguing foil for Picard, who was the ultimate straight arrow, usually. But in this episode, it's Vash who's the straight arrow. Yes, they pay lip service to the fact that she's amoral, she's a plunderer, she's been shunned by reputable archaeological associations, but it's all just that. Lip service. We're told that Vash is an unsavory character, but we don't actually see her behaving that way in the episode. Quite the opposite. The most underhanded thing she does is give Quark a handjob to get a more favorable split of the auction proceeds. And then she opens the auction, almost putting the prospective buyers to sleep by talking like an archaeology professor. When did Vash turn into such a square, man? The other guest character is Q, of course, and Q just doesn't belong on this show. Part of it is another form of the aforementioned Vash problem. Q is a troublemaker and antagonist, a shit starter, and he works best when he's up against a character like Picard, who is principled, yes, but also stiff and straight-laced and not amused by Q's act. Sisko short-circuiting Q's boxing scenario by just hauling off and punching him makes for a great moment in isolation, and it definitely makes the point that Sisko is not the same kind of character as Picard, which is an important point for the show to emphasize early in the run like this, and I appreciate it for that. But the truth is, that sort of dynamic isn't as interesting and doesn't have the potential to be as consistently compelling as the dynamic between Q and Picard. Not that it matters anyway, since Q has almost no interaction with Sisko or any of the regulars. He spends almost all of his time pestering Vash, tormenting Vash, harassing Vash, chasing Vash like a possessive ex-boyfriend. It's creepy, it's abusive, it's pathetic, and worst of all, this being a TV show, it's not entertaining, it's not compelling, it's not funny. It's tedious. It's two guest characters having the same argument off and on for most of an hour, while most of the regular cast just kind of stands off to the side like, do you need us for any of this? Obviously, it's possible to do crossovers that work. Star Trek has had numerous episodes where characters from one series, regulars or recurring characters, appeared on another series, and the result was a good show, or at least not a bad show, but Q-less is a bad show. It's not the worst episode DS9 ever produced. You can tell because Lwaxana Troy's not in it. But it's down there near the bottom. Q and Vash feel like what they are, characters from another series who don't belong here. This episode was written by Robert Hewitt Wolfe, his first writing credit for Deep Space Nine. Wolfe would go on to write or co-write, usually with Ira Steven Behr, some of the best episodes of the series, including The Wire, Past Tense, Hard Time, and Trials and Tribulations. He's one of the best writers from this era of Star Trek. But Q-less is not his best work. It feels like someone in the writer's room said, hey, let's do a Q episode. And someone else asked, why? And then they made the episode before they answered that question. Those are my thoughts on Q-less. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would, if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Please join me again next week for another retro review. This batch of Q episodes continues as we head back to the Enterprise D one more time to review a little episode titled Tapestry. See you then. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.